picture this. It's around Christmas time, Phoenix, 2006. There's been a really brutal home invasion. A young woman is dead. Her boyfriend, just 18 years old, he's barely alive, shot in the head.
A terrible scene.
But when the police get there, instead of, rushing him to the hospital, this kid, critically injured, obviously battered, confused, he finds himself being treated like a suspect.
Handcuffed.
Yeah, handcuffed, held for hours, interrogated, all while he's got this potentially fatal head wound. This is the story of Ryan Waller and Heather Kwan.
That's really the core of it, isn't it? A truly deeply disturbing case. Ryan was 18, Heather 21, victims of just extreme violence.
By two men, they actually knew Larry and Richie Carver, father and son.
Right.
And so for this deep dive, we're really focusing on the sources, the articles, news reports, all the notes you've gathered to try and understand not just the crime itself, but how Ryan, the survivor, got tangled up in a system that, well, it seemed to work against him.
At pretty much every turn, yeah. We need to look at the timeline, the failures in judgment, the protocols, or lack thereof.
The legal fights that followed. And what this whole thing tells us about how vulnerable people can be treated when the system's under pressure.
And it starts right with the attack itself. But even there's this immediate point of, well, contention, the date.
Ah, yes.
The date. Some sources suggest December 23rd initially. But Ryan's family, they firmly believe it happened on Christmas night, December 25th.
And that detail, which might seem small, it actually ends up being pretty significant for the police timeline, the response.
Huge implications for when they found Ryan, how long he might have been there, absolutely.
Okay, so let's dive into the attack first. The sources paint a picture of Ryan, typical teenager, into guitar, tech stuff. Heather was his girlfriend.
Living together. And Richie Carver, who was Ryan's former roommate, and Richie's dad, Larry, they forced their way in.
The motive is described pretty vaguely, isn't it? Revenge for presumed altercation.
Yeah, presumed altercation. But the violence wasn't vague at all. It was extreme. Ryan was shot point blank near his eye.
And Heather, she was shot and killed. The sources suggest maybe because she witnessed Ryan being shot.
That seems to be the thinking, yes. A witness elimination. And then they stole weapons, a computer, and left. Just a horrific, brutal scene.
And this brings us back to that disputed date. Ryan and Heather were supposed to be at Christmas dinner on the 25th. They didn't show up.
That's what triggered the alarm bells for Ryan's father, Don Waller. He's the one who requested the police do a welfare check.
Right. And Heather's obituary also lists December 25th as the date she died.
So Don Waller, Ryan's dad, he's raised serious questions. He's alleged that maybe the police documented the wrong date, perhaps pushed it back to the 23rd.
To potentially cover up delays. Obscure how long it took between the welfare check request and actually finding Ryan.
That's the allegation, yes. To minimize the gap in response time.
Okay, so let's unpack the scene when the police finally do arrive after that welfare check. What did they find?
They found Heather tragically deceased, and they found Ryan alive, but only just.
The descriptions are pretty stark. Severely injured, battered and confused, dazed, even uncooperative.
And visible facial injuries, really bad ones. A black eye, wounds on his nose, his cheeks. I mean, clearly something was very wrong.
But this is where things take a really sharp turn, isn't it? A critical breakdown happens almost immediately.
It seems so, because instead of focusing on his obvious medical state, the sources say the responding officers, well, they zeroed in on him as the suspect.
They thought, what? That his head injury was just a black eye. Maybe from a fight with Heather.
That seems to be the interpretation they ran with initially. A domestic dispute gone wrong, perhaps. And that flawed assumption, that terrible misreading of a life-threatening injury.
It just overshadowed everything else. It's hard to believe, but the sources say he was handcuffed right there at the scene.
Handcuffed and put in a police car. And kept there. For several hours, without any medical attention.
And his parents, they showed up, didn't they?
They did. But reportedly, they were kept away. Prevented from seeing him, prevented from trying to get him to a hospital themselves.
Which just goes against, everything you'd expect, right? Standard procedure.
Completely. Basic police protocols, national guidelines, even Phoenix PD's own rules at the time. They all say you arrange medical aid for injured people, priority one.
And labeling him uncooperative.
Yeah.
When he's got these injuries.
Yeah.
Those could easily be signs of a severe brain injury, couldn't they?
Absolutely. Confusion, disorientation, lack of cooperation, classic TBI symptoms. To just write that off as being difficult, it shows a profound lack of understanding or maybe a disregard for the duty of care, a massive misjudgment.
And the situation just kept getting worse for Ryan because he wasn't taken from the crime scene to a hospital.
No. He was taken to a Phoenix police station.
For interrogation.
For interrogation. This is hours after he was found. We're talking early morning, December 26th, according to one source.
So let me get this straight. Obvious, severe head trauma. No doctor has seen him yet. And the decision is questioning.
That's what the sources indicate. And get this, they apparently took something like 43 photos of his injuries before the interrogation started.
They documented the injuries, but didn't treat them.
Documented them, yes, but prioritized the interview. It really shows how, in this instance, the investigative urge completely overrode the immediate, life-threatening medical need. It's appalling, frankly.
In the interrogation itself, conducted by a detective, Paul Dalton, who had, 15 years on the force?
Yeah.
6 in homicide?
Yes, an experienced detective. But the descriptions of Ryan during this interrogation are just heartbreaking. He's clearly in pain, confused, asking repeatedly if he can just sleep.
With bullets still in his head?
With bullets still in his head. And there's this exchange. Ryan mentions being shot near the eye.
And the detective dismisses it.
Reportedly says something like, if they shot you in the eye with a revolver, you wouldn't be talking to me right now. Just completely dismissive.
And Ryan's response, how do you know? Which is, wow.
Yeah. And Ryan's answers throughout this are disjointed, sometimes nonsensical. He keeps saying, I don't know. He gives incorrect details like saying Heather's dad did it or that Richie was Heather's brother.
Classic signs of brain injury, right? Confusion, memory fragmentation.
Textbook TBI indicators. He couldn't keep the details straight. But somehow, despite this state, he did eventually manage to name the actual perpetrators.
Richie and Larry Carver.
Yes, he eventually got their names out.
But this whole situation, interrogating someone in that condition, it raises huge red flags, doesn't it? Ethically, legally.
Oh, absolutely. Someone with a severe TBI is incredibly vulnerable. They're highly suggestible. Their memory is unreliable. They can't properly consent to questioning or waive their rights.
So any information you get out of those circumstances is inherently questionable.
Deeply questionable, yes.
Yeah.
And the process itself feels coercive, interrogating someone so clearly impaired and injured.
So after all this, the hours at the scene, the hours at the station, then he finally gets to a hospital.
Finally. Sources vary on the exact total time he was with police before getting care, but it sounds like it could have been upwards of 9 hours, maybe more.
9 hours with a gunshot wound to the head before seeing a doctor. And what did the doctors find?
They confirmed it immediately, of course. Gunshot wound to the head. He needed surgery, urgent surgery.
Which involved removing part of his brain.
Part of his brain, yes. And he lost his left eye. Permanently.
Just devastating.
But it didn't end there. He developed a really severe infection. And Ryan's father was apparently told later that this infection was a direct consequence of that long delay in getting treatment.
Because the wound wasn't cleaned, wasn't treated for hours?
Exactly. And that infection complicated things further. It actually delayed the surgery to remove the bullet fragments for 3 days.
Oh, wow. So the delay caused an infection that then delayed vital surgery?
That seems to be the chain of events, yes. He was in the hospital for, I think, 35 days initially.
And the long-term effects?
Immense. Permanent blindness in that left eye. Significant ongoing memory loss. And critically, he developed lifelong debilitating seizures.
Seizures that stem from the brain injury.
Stemming from the injury, yes. And this whole case is just such a stark, tragic example of what happens when you ignore the golden hour principle in trauma care.
That critical first hour where getting treatment makes the biggest difference.
Precisely. Getting immediate care can drastically improve outcomes, prevent complications like infection, limit long-term damage. That window was completely missed for Ryan. Slammed shut, really.
And then, tragically, Ryan Waller passed away in January 2016. He was only 27.
Just 27 years old. His death was attributed to complications from those seizures.
Seizures that started after the attack and the delayed treatment.
Exactly. So his family and many observers see his premature death as directly linked not just to the initial violent attack, but profoundly exacerbated by that critical delay in receiving medical care after he was found.
It's just layer upon layer of tragedy. Now, shifting gears a bit to the legal side, what happened with the attackers, the Carvers?
Well, based on Ryan's identification, even given the state he was in when he made it, the criminal justice system did move forward.
Okay.
Richie Carver, the son, he was convicted back in 2008. Felony murder, burglary, other charges. He got a sentence of natural life.
So life in prison, and the father, Larry Carver.
His path was more complicated. Initially, the case against him actually got dismissed
Dismissed. Why?
because his wife, Richie's mother, invoked marital privilege. She refused to testify against her husband, and without her testimony at that point, the state felt they couldn't proceed.
A legal loophole, essentially.
Pretty much. It allowed him to walk free, at least for a time, despite Ryan's identification.
But that led to something significant, didn't it? Heather's Law.
It did. Heather Kwan's family, understandably outraged by this loophole, they really championed a change in the law, and that led to Heather's Law.
Named in her memory, what did it do?
It amended Arizona's marital privilege statute. It was passed in 2009. Basically, it created exceptions to that privilege, allowing spouses to testify against each other in certain serious criminal cases, like murder, under specific conditions.
So it closed that loophole.
It aimed to, yes. No, there was then a legal fight about whether this new law could be applied retroactively to Larry Carver's case.
Could it?
The courts eventually ruled that yes, it could. The state argued successfully for its application. So Larry Carver was reindicted in November 2011.
And this time?
This time, with his wife presumably able to testify, he went to trial. In December 2012, a jury convicted him. First-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, burglary, aggravated assault.
And the sentence?
Natural life, same as his son. He was sentenced in January 2013.
So eventually, both were held accountable for the crime itself.
Yes, for the crime itself, accountability was ultimately achieved through the criminal courts. Heather's Law stands as this significant legislative change, but it's definitely a reactive one, right? Born directly from this tragedy and the specific legal barrier it exposed.
But the story doesn't end there, because there was still the issue of how Ryan himself was treated by the police.
Exactly. The fight for justice for Ryan wasn't just about convicting the Carvers. The Waller family also sought accountability for what happened to Ryan after he was found.
His father, Don Waller, filed a civil lawsuit.
He did. Representing Ryan, he sued the city of Phoenix, the police department, and Detective Dalton specifically.
Alleging what? Negligence? Civil rights violations?
All of that, yes. Negligence in failing to provide medical care, violations of his civil rights, and they also included claims about evidence tampering specifically related to that disputed date of the incident. They sought substantial damages, around $15 million.
What happened with that lawsuit? Did you go to trial?
No. And this was another really devastating blow for the family. The judge dismissed the entire lawsuit just, I think, 3 weeks before it was scheduled to go to trial.
Dismissed? On what grounds?
The city of Phoenix brought in an expert witness, and this expert basically argued that the delay those hours Ryan waited for medical care wouldn't have ultimately changed the extent of his injuries, that the damage was already done by the gunshot itself.
Wow. So the city argued the delay didn't matter medically.
That was their argument, presented through this expert opinion, and apparently the judge found it persuasive enough to dismiss the case before a jury could even hear it.
But the Waller family must have disagreed strongly.
Oh, absolutely. They felt it was incredibly unjust. They had their own expert lined up, ready to testify to the exact opposite, that for a brain injury, a bleeding, swelling brain, every single minute of delay is critical and absolutely can worsen the outcome.
The whole golden hour concept again.
Precisely. Their expert was ready to argue that the delay directly contributed to the severity of Ryan's long-term problems, including the infection and maybe the seizures.
So the civil suit dismissal, it really highlights another kind of systemic failure, doesn't it? How hard it can be to get accountability.
It really does. You have this battle of the experts, complex legal procedures.
Yeah.
It can create huge barriers for individuals trying to hold large institutions like a city or a police department accountable, even when there seems to be a clear lapse in the fundamental duty of care, and even when it contradicts generally accepted medical principles about TBI.
So if we zoom out now and look at the whole picture, what are the major systemic issues, the bigger lessons that Ryan Waller's story really forces us to confront?
Well, one huge one is definitely the danger of tunnel vision in investigations. That tendency to lock onto an initial theory, in this case, Ryan as the suspect, and then filter everything through that lens, even ignoring clear evidence to the contrary, like his severe injuries.
That initial assumption just derailed everything.
It really did. And tied to that is the critical need for better training for police officers in recognizing traumatic brain injury.
Understanding that confusion or lack of cooperation might be injury, not defiance or intoxication.
Exactly. TBI symptoms are so easily misinterpreted, and mistaking them can have, as we see here, catastrophic results. The difference is life and death, potentially.
Then there's the failure to follow basic protocols for medical aid. Either the protocols were ignored, Or maybe they weren't robust enough, but the duty to get help for an injured person seems fundamental.
It should be non-negotiable. And then there's the question of accountability within the system itself.
Right. The internal investigation by Phoenix PD reportedly cleared the detective involved of any wrongdoing. He later retired.
And when you have serious allegations lingering, like Don Waller's claim about the date being falsified to minimize liability and the internal review finds no fault, well, it raises questions about how effectively these systems police themselves. Is there genuine internal accountability?
It's interesting, too, that years later, the Phoenix Police Department faced a major Department of Justice investigation. That was launched in 2021, I think.
That's right. Looking into patterns of excessive force, discrimination, how they treated vulnerable people, including those with disabilities or mental health issues.
Now, that DOJ probe wasn't a direct result of the Waller case, obviously, given the time gap.
But the findings of that investigation, which just wrapped up recently, did suggest ongoing systemic problems within the department related to some of these very issues. It hints that maybe some of the underlying concerns highlighted so tragically by Ryan's case might have persisted long after.
So, reflecting on Ryan's life and his death at just 27, it feels like more than just the result of a single criminal act.
It really does. It feels like a consequence compounded by systemic failures. Some people have even described cases like this as a kind of slow-motion homicide by system, where institutional neglect, bias, and failures of care contribute significantly to the ultimate tragic outcome.
Though on the other side, you have Heather's Law as a tangible, positive legacy, proof that advocacy spurred by tragedy can lead to real legal reform.
Definitely. That's an important piece of this. The Kwan family's fight made a difference there, fixing a specific legal flaw.
But Ryan's story, overall, it leaves us with some really powerful and frankly disturbing lessons, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The profound danger of bias clouding judgment. The absolute, non-negotiable duty of care owed by law enforcement to anyone injured, regardless of circumstances.
The incredible vulnerability of someone suffering from a TBI when they encounter the justice system.
And the critical need for robust, transparent accountability mechanisms when these fundamental duties are failed. The Waller family's ongoing efforts to keep Ryan's memory alive, to keep pushing for answers and accountability, it's a testament to that need.
Ryan Waller's story is it's incredibly complex, deeply heartbreaking. You have this horrific violent crime, and then it gets tangled up with this series of systemic breakdowns.
Yeah, from the initial police response, that denial of urgent medical care, the deeply questionable interrogation of someone clearly injured.
Leading to lifelong suffering, and then the immense challenges the family faced trying to get justice, trying to get accountability. It's just a lot to take in.
And it's important to remember, this isn't just some isolated incident frozen in the past. It really highlights ongoing challenges that exist within policing and justice systems everywhere.
Challenges around bias, around recognizing medical needs, especially neurological ones like TBI, by people who aren't medical experts.
And the persistent struggle to ensure real accountability when things go wrong, when that basic duty of care gets pushed aside.
So it really leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty heavy question, doesn't it? How can we make sure that the systems we design to protect us actually prioritize basic human care and compassion first? Especially for the most vulnerable people who are injured, confused, unable to advocate for themselves.
And perhaps even more importantly, when those fundamental duties are failed, with consequences that can last a lifetime, or even end one prematurely. How do we ensure that accountability is not just a possibility, but a reality? How do we make that happen?
Something to really think about.